The fluorescent lights of the supermarket hummed loudly overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow on the worn-out linoleum floor. For most people, it was just another busy Tuesday evening, a quick stop to grab dinner before heading home to a warm house. But for Clara, the simple act of standing in the checkout line felt like walking to the edge of a steep cliff. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a crumpled $10 bill and a few loose coins inside her coat pocket. She closed her eyes for a brief second and prayed it would be enough. Right beside her, her 7-year-old son, Noah, was looking up at her with bright, trusting eyes, entirely unaware of the heavy, silent burden resting on his mother's tired shoulders. Clara was a woman who knew the true meaning of hard work and sacrifice. For the past 3 years, ever since her life had been unexpectedly turned upside down by loss, she had been carrying the weight of the world completely alone. She worked 2 exhausting jobs, cleaning houses in the early mornings while the city was still asleep, and folding clothes at a local laundromat deep into the night. Despite her relentless efforts, the bills always seemed to outpace her small paychecks. Lately, things had been harder than usual. The harsh winter had driven up the heating bill, and just last week, Noah had outgrown his only pair of warm winter boots. Clara had skipped her own meals more times than she could count, just to make sure her little boy went to sleep with a full stomach. She never complained. She believed that as long as they had each other, they were rich in the ways that truly mattered. Tonight was a special night, though it didn't look like much to the outside world. It was Noah's 7th birthday. There would be no grand party, no mountain of wrapped presents, and no expensive cake. But Clara had promised him a special dinner, a simple box of macaroni and cheese, a small carton of milk, and a single chocolate cupcake with a small swirl of frosting on top. As they navigated the busy aisles of the grocery store, Noah held the small plastic container holding the cupcake as if it were made of pure gold. "Look, Mom," he whispered, his eyes shining with pure joy. "It has sprinkles on it." Clara smiled down at him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "It sure does, sweetie. The best one in the whole store." But beneath her gentle smile, a knot of deep anxiety was pulling tight in her chest. She had mentally calculated the cost of the items in their small handbasket at least a dozen times. The macaroni, the milk, a loaf of bread for the week, and the birthday cupcake. It came out to exactly $10.14. She had exactly $10.20 in her pocket. It was going to be painfully close. As they approached the checkout lanes, Clara noticed the store was more crowded than usual. People were rushing, pushing overflowing carts filled with prime cuts of meat, expensive snacks, and bottles of wine. The contrast between their abundance and her small basket made her feel incredibly small. They stepped into line behind a woman in an expensive coat. The cashier working the register, a young woman named Sarah, looked utterly exhausted. It had been a long shift, and her patience was clearly running thin. She was scanning items with rapid, aggressive movements, barely making eye contact with the customers. She sighed heavily when the machine failed to scan a barcode, typing the numbers in with frustrated, sharp taps. Clara swallowed hard. She hated feeling this way, like an inconvenience, like someone who didn't belong. When it was finally their turn, she stepped up to the counter and carefully placed her 4 items on the black conveyor belt. "Hi, how are you this evening?" Clara asked softly, trying to offer a bit of warmth. Sarah didn't look up. She just gave a dismissive nod and grabbed the first item. Beep the bread, beep the macaroni, beep the milk. Clara watched the glowing green numbers on the register screen climb. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled $10 bill and the few coins, smoothing the paper money out on the counter. Then Sarah grabbed the small plastic container holding the cupcake. Beep. Clara looked at the screen. 11:45. Her heart dropped into her stomach. A cold sweat broke out across her neck. Wait, she thought, her mind racing. The bread. The sign said it was on sale. "Excuse me," Clara said, her voice shaking just a little. "I'm so sorry, but I think the bread rang up wrong. The sign back there said it was $1.50. Sarah finally looked up, her expression hardening. She let out a loud, exaggerated sigh and rolled her eyes. "Ma'am, that sale ended yesterday. It's $2.99. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. The people in line behind her began to shift impatiently. A man in a business suit checked his watch and muttered something under his breath. The pressure was suffocating. I only have $10.20, Clara whispered, looking down at the worn money on the counter. The shame washed over her like a heavy wave. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and completely defeated. Sarah rolled her eyes again, crossing her arms. So, what do you want me to put back? You're holding up the line. Clara's eyes darted to the items. She needed the bread for Noah's lunches. She needed the milk. The macaroni was his birthday dinner. She looked down at Noah. He was looking at her, his small hands gripping the edge of the counter. He didn't fully understand the math, but he understood the tension. He saw the way the cashier looked at his mother. He saw the redness in his mother's eyes. Without missing a beat, Noah reached out and pushed the small plastic container holding the cupcake toward the cashier. We don't need this, Noah said, his small voice steady and brave. I don't even like chocolate that much. Anyway, Clara's heart broke into a million pieces. She knew chocolate was his favorite. She knew how much he had been looking forward to that one little treat. The fact that her 7-year-old son was trying to protect her, trying to absorb her shame, was almost too much to bear. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Are you sure, baby? Clara choked out. Yeah, Noah smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm sure, Sarah grabbed the cupcake and started to hit the void button on the register, her face devoid of any empathy. Stop right there! The voice was deep, calm, and carried a quiet authority that instantly silenced the murmurs in the line. Clara turned around. Standing right behind her was an older gentleman. He had a neat gray beard, kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, and he wore a simple worn leather jacket. He stepped forward, moving past the impatient businessman, and gently placed his hand over Noah's. You don't have to put that back, young man, the stranger said softly. He looked up at the cashier, his expression firm but completely peaceful. Please ring the cupcake back up. In fact, ring up all her groceries. And these, too. The older man reached into his cart and pulled out a beautiful, freshly baked chocolate cake with vibrant blue frosting and a small toy car. He placed them gently on the belt next to Clara's items. Clara stepped back, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. Sir, no. Please, you don't have to do that. We are fine, really. The man turned to Clara and smiled, a smile so full of grace and understanding that it immediately brought the tears. Clara had been fighting straight to her cheeks. My name is Arthur, he said gently. And 40 years ago, my mother stood in a line just like this one. She was a young widow, and she didn't have enough money to buy me a birthday present. A stranger stepped up and paid for our groceries. And it changed the way I saw the world forever. Arthur reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $50 bill, handing it to the stunned cashier. Sarah's hands were actually shaking as she took the money. The annoyance on her face had completely vanished, replaced by a look of profound realization and shame. She said, We're just waiting for someone. Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion as he recalled his own mother's brave face. But the truth was she had no one. Until God sent a stranger. He looked down at Noah and winked. Happy birthday, Noah. Never forget to share your cake. The entire checkout lane was completely silent. The businessman who had been tapping his watch was now looking down at his shoes, visibly moved. Sarah, the cashier, carefully bagged the groceries, slipping the receipt inside. When she handed the bags to Clara, her eyes were filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. I've just been having a really hard day. But that was no excuse. Have a beautiful birthday, Noah. Clara took the bags, the warmth of the moment radiating through her entire body. The heavy, suffocating burden she had walked in with was completely gone, replaced by a soaring sense of gratitude and renewed faith. She turned to thank Arthur again, but he was already walking away, pushing his cart toward the exit, disappearing into the cold winter night. He didn't stay for praise. He didn't stay for applause. He simply planted a seed of kindness and went on his way. As Clara and Noah walked out into the chilly evening air, the wind didn't feel quite so cold anymore. Noah held his toy car in one hand and Clara's hand in the other, skipping lightly across the pavement. Sometimes we feel like we are entirely alone in our struggles. We feel like the world is cold, impatient, and rushing past us. But if we hold on just a little bit longer, we might find that grace has a way of showing up exactly when we need it most. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change someone's world. Share this story if it touched your heart. And remember to be the stranger that someone is praying for today.